I'm Stacy. Welcome to the kitchen of my old Kentucky home. On Bourbon and Biscuits, we try to showcase Kentucky's culinary heritage. And today we're going to be cooking up two of my favorites. One is a southern treat I grew up on here in Louisville, a fried pie. And Jessica's going to be putting a fruity spin on that classic cocktail, the whiskey sour. Let's get started. For our fried pie crust, we will need 2 cups of all-purpose flour, 3/4 a cup of Crisco, 1/3 a cup of milk, 1 teaspoon of baking powder, 1 teaspoon of salt, and 1 tablespoon of sugar. Much like fried chicken or bourbon balls, there really is no singular recipe among Kentucky cooks for fried pies. In fact, the recipe I'm using today was a little bit like my grandmother's would have made, which is more of a biscuit dough side combined with more of an Amish style that's a little more flaky pastry. So today we're going to use a food processor to make this dough, but you don't have to. In fact, if you have a pastry blender or just 2 backsides of a fork, you can make this recipe as well. But it's just a little easier to do it in the food processor. Of course, my grandmothers didn't have this wonderful appliance. What we're going to do though is take out the metal blade that you're used to for most things, and we're going to sub in a pastry blade if you have it. We're going to take our 2 cups of all-purpose flour, and if you have one of those hand crank sifters, you can use that. If you don't, you can simply use a little colander. We're going to add in our sugar, salt, baking powder. I'm just going to kind of give this a couple pulses. All right, now we're going to cut in our Crisco, and you can't see this on camera, but this is very chilled. You don't want this room temperature, so I just took it out of the fridge. And if we were working with the pastry blender, we would just work to cut this into our bowl. We don't have to do that since we have this great gadget. We're just going to let it run. It's going to start to form a crumbly texture. I'll give you a look at this. A lot of crumbles in there. Just want to get all the dry ingredients blended with that Crisco before we add the milk. Okay, so I think that looks nice and crumbly like that. And you can add this at once, or I think today we're going to pour this in through the stream here. If that milk looked a little odd on camera, that is fresh from the dairy, so you can see that fat kind of separating from the liquid. It's the good stuff. Okay, we don't want this to knead, so we just want it to get moistened. And I think that looks good. Now that our dough is mixed, for this next part, you'll want to remove any jewelry you have on your hands. So we're going to get a little messy. I'm going to take some flour. I'm just going to use the all-purpose that I had. It really doesn't matter at this point. Use self-rising. I'm just going to get my hands coated so they don't stick. And we're just going to pull this dough right out of the bowl. Trying to draw it all up into a ball as best we can before it comes out. Just makes it easier to work with. So we're just pressing it together. Came out pretty clean. Okay, you're just going to roll this into a ball. Doesn't have to be perfect by any stretch of the imagination. Put it on a plate, and we're going to put this in the freezer for about 10 minutes to let it get chilled before we roll it out. Our dough is nice and chilled now, and we're going to have in one more step before we're ready to start shaping up our fried pie crust. So we're going to take this, we'll just kind of make it into a log, really. Got some flour here to put on that, put on our counter here. If you don't have a nice countertop like this, you can use a pastry board. And by nice, I just mean smooth. Okay, we're just gonna roll this just a couple inches long. I think we're gonna be able to get 6 pies out of this amount. So I'm just gonna take a pastry wheel here and cut this in half first, and then into 3 sections each. And then we're just gonna take each one of these and roll them up into a ball somewhere between a ping pong ball and a baseball. We're just gonna take each of these and form them up. And we're gonna pop these into the freezer again for another 10 minutes. While we're waiting for our dough balls to chill up a little bit more, I'm gonna talk you through some of the other things we'll need for our fried pies. We just need a couple of tools, a fork to crimp. We're gonna need that pastry wheel that we used to cut the log earlier. We're gonna need a rolling pin, and then we're gonna need some filling. So my grandmothers always used apples in their filling, and they actually used dried apples, which was a lot more laborious than I was ready to get into. So I just used some fresh apples and cooked those on the stove with some butter, sugar, cinnamon, add a little cornstarch to thicken it. We'll have the recipe online for that. And then you can always cheat with some pie filling that you can get out of a can. And since I only had a couple of apples, my daughter loves strawberries, so I thought I'd throw some of those in as well. So let's grab one of the pie doughs chilled out of the freezer, and we'll show you how you roll it out. Okay, we're gonna take a little flour, put it on our work surface. Just press this into a disc to get going. Take our rolling pin, which we also might wanna coat just a little bit. Oh, I forgot to mention we're gonna be using a little pastry brush too, which you can just use a spoon if you don't have that. And we're just gonna take about 2 tablespoons of your pie filling, whatever you've chosen. You can use anything, the peach, lemon, you can even use chocolate pudding. Here in Louisville, you'll see a lot of a riff on a derby pie filling with chocolate chips and pecans. Okay, then we're gonna take our little pastry brush that is just simply in water. You can also use an egg wash if you want, but this will work just fine. We're gonna kind of paint the perimeter of our dough disc, and then we're just gonna flip this over on top of each other, turn it over. We're gonna press this down, and this can be done one of 2 ways. You can go on and make the crimps with your fork now and then finish it off, or I like to clean it up first with the pastry wheel. Get rid of that. And then I like to do my crimping. And we're gonna put this back in the freezer to get a little chilled more while I go and make the rest of the 5 fried pies before we take these to the hot grease. Okay, we're using a cast iron skillet to fry up our fried pies, and I just have canola oil in here. We brought it to a temperature of 350, which is what we're gonna keep it at. I've got our fried pies out of the freezer. I've left 2 in because we want to only do 2 at a time and want to keep them as cold as possible right before we cook. Okay, this is gonna splatter a little bit, so you wanna be really careful. I like to use a spatula to slowly drop my fried pie into the grease. And these are really difficult to turn, so I like to, just as they're cooking, almost like I'm doing a fried egg, just to put the grease right over the top. And we're just looking for a light golden brown color. Okay, this one is looking golden brown. While our pies are cooling, I'm going to whip up a little frosting to top them off with, which is just simply powdered sugar, little milk, and some bourbon vanilla. And Jessica is gonna whip us up a peach whiskey sour.
Since Stacy was making fried pies today, I wanted to make a cocktail that is one of my favorite fried pie flavors, which is peach. So today we're gonna make a peach whiskey sour. We're gonna use an egg, fresh squeezed lemon juice, brown sugar simple syrup, and we're actually gonna be using a peach bourbon made by Evan Williams. So to get started, what we're gonna do is separate our egg. I'm gonna go ahead and do the egg part first, just in case I get any shell in it or don't do a good job separating it. I don't wanna have our other ingredients, especially bourbon, already in the shaker that we have to get rid of. So I'm just gonna use both sides of the egg shell to separate out the yolk. Okay, perfect, no shells in there. And then we're gonna do just an ounce of our lemon juice. We're gonna use a tablespoon of the brown sugar simple syrup. And again, to make our simple syrup, we're just gonna do equal parts sugar and water, heat it up until the sugar dissolves. And then I'm gonna do 2 ounces of this bourbon. And I actually learned some great techniques about making whiskey sours or cocktails with egg whites when I went to a cocktail class at Evan Williams, so it's a little extra inspiration for using this bourbon. So what we're gonna do first is we're gonna do what's called a dry shake, which is before we add the ice. And this is going to just be an extra good step for when you're using an egg white in your cocktail to get it very incorporated and add some more frothiness. And you wanna give this a really good shake. You're gonna actually kind of be able to feel like the gases in the cocktail shaker start to build up a little bit. And it kind of even pops off, so you really know that you're doing it right there. So that was our dry shake, and then we're gonna add ice and do our wet shake. All right, again, just with egg whites, you're gonna do a little extra on the shaking than you normally would. So also, since we're using egg here, I want to strain it, not just with our regular strainer, but with a kind of a fine mesh sieve here, just in case there are any egg white particles in there that clump together, or if you happen to get any of the shell in there. Oops. So then the last thing we're gonna do is spritz this with a little bit of lemon juice. The egg white's not gonna taste like anything, but sometimes it'll have a little bit of a scent. So that's it, that's all there is to it. It is a peach whiskey sour.
Well, Jessica, this is just peachy.
How dare you?
So you know this is one of my favorite classic cocktails.
I do. I know you have a whiskey sour.
You've elevated it. The egg white is beautiful. I really feel like I'm at one of the higher end cocktail bars on the Urban Bourbon Trail right now.
Well, thank you very much. And you know, I don't normally use a mixed bourbon or a flavored bourbon, but this Evan Williams peach is really delicious, and it's their Kentucky straight bourbon whiskey mixed with peach liqueur. So it's tasty and it's still pretty authentic.
It's great. Would you ever use like a peach preserve if you didn't have? Would that work?
Yeah, you know, I think that would work, especially if you don't have this brand in your market. But especially also since we're gonna go ahead and strain the cocktail with the egg white in it, you wouldn't worry about having peach bits or anything like that too. So yeah, for sure.
So that kind of reminds me of the tradition of fried pies, and back 200 years ago, when you couldn't go to the grocery and buy pie filling off the shelf like we cheated a little bit with today, but we did make the apples, and that's how my grandmothers they could have fried pies all year because they dried their apples on screens and use that. So this recipe that I used today wasn't my grandmother's, and I have a funny story about it. Okay, so theirs was more, as I recall, more of a biscuit-laden dough. But I asked my mother for the recipe because I hadn't actually made them with my grandmother's. Not only did she not have it, she said she never liked them anyway.
Oh, well.
Right? So, okay. I liked them. But they were a little different than the ones that we now get at the farmer's market from April to October that are a little more, maybe it's an Amish recipe, a little more of the pastry dough to it. So I did this was a hybrid recipe, and I've got to admit, I found it a little challenging some days. I tried it several times before I got this one, and sometimes they didn't work so well out in the fry pan if I didn't get the dough just cold enough. but I learned a secret in doing this that was more of a no-fail that didn't show on camera, but I wanted to say now, if you bake them off first a little bit and don't get them too golden brown, and then just flash fry them at the end, and I think we have a picture of the two looks of that, but that was a little easier if you didn't
more
get
foolproof.
Right, a little more foolproof.
Yeah. But I mean, isn't that kind of the beauty of Kentucky cooking? You could take these old recipes and make them your own.
I think you're right. Cheers to old traditions with new twists.
All right, and we'll see you next time on Bourbon
And Biscuits.
Cheers.